Morning everyone. I'm going to start now. So welcome to today's webinar. My name's Charles. I'm a Senior Group Relationship Manager at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And we're here today with an esteemed panel to talk about retaining and recruiting talent during a global pandemic. So as I say, welcome. Hope everybody's safe and well. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can welcome you back to events in person, but certainly that's on ice at the moment. So for now, keep those Zoom accounts dusted off. Don't delete them just yet. And please do keep tuning in to the variety of webinars, networking sessions that we at the Chamber are continuing to put on. Again, just in terms of an update, we've got quite a bit coming up actually. It's our Commonwealth International Week. So anyone that's involved in international trade, that takes place towards the end of February. So please do have a look at that. There's a Commonwealth Games webinar, as well as our Commonwealth Conference on the Thursday of that week towards the end of February. I think it's the 25th of February, possibly 24th. But yeah, please do join us. Please do keep in touch. Please do keep reviewing all of the webinars and events that are going on online. As I say, lots added regularly to try and connect people as best we can. But turning to today, as I say, I've got a panel and much in the spirit of collaboration. We've got a guest panel of 3 speakers for you today to talk about retaining and recruiting talent. I'm joined by Tristan Prince from NetWatch. Give us a wave, Tristan. I'm joined from Gemma Carter Morris from Next Steps Consulting. Morning, Gemma.
Morning.
And I'm also joined by Trevor Gibson, partner at Hemmingsley Law, local employment law specialist. And our panelists are going to go and kind of each in their own area talk you through their areas of specialism and how they can help support you and talk you through the things to be looking out for. I think one thing that this pandemic certainly brought about is a change and certainly a focus on the real value of the employee and also on the importance of looking after the well-being of the employee. So as I say, our panelists will talk you through getting the right person on board and why that's important and how all the costs and negative effects of not bringing on board the right person, through to what happens when things go a little bit wrong, which none of us, but what happens if they do, and finally, I think Gemma's going to touch on the well-being element. How do you look after? How do you ensure you're best set up to retain those top talents when they're in the organisation? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tristan Prince to kick things off. Tristan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charles. So, hi everyone, I'm Tristan Prince, Group Chief Commercial Officer at NetWatch Global. As Charles mentioned, I'm here today with Gemma and Trevor to talk to you about some of the challenges that are occurring during the global pandemic, particularly relating to obviously retaining and recruiting talent. And first and foremost, we're going to touch on some of the issues. So what making a bad hire can look like for your organization, what can and does go wrong, and some of the major risks and challenges that it can represent. We're going to talk a little bit about the potential damage that bad hires can do. And Trevor will kindly be talking through a couple of examples of some of the things that we've seen and that he's seen in his organization during the pandemic. But also what a bad hire can do to your productivity, to your business and to your culture as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can turbocharge your employment screening and vetting process to make sure that when you're onboarding a new member of staff, you get the best results. And also how to ensure that that new member of staff has a good fit with your organization, your brand, your culture, and the rest of your employees. And then finally, I'm going to be handing over to Gemma, who will talk to you a bit more about retention and engagement and some of the challenges and pressures that leaders and employees are facing in the current environment, and some things, some tips and some advice for things that you can do to keep staff engaged. We will have time for questions at the end. I know Charles is going to be running the question session, so if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will go and respond to those at the end, but hopefully looking forward to the session today anyway. So to begin, So I thought what would be really useful as a starting point is to talk about some of the issues from a bad hiring perspective. And the truth of the matter is that when you're employing a new employee, or even if you're choosing a new job yourself, things can go wrong. And I'm certain in the past I've been responsible for making some bad hires, and I'm certain that a lot of the people maybe on the call today may have done so as well. And I can even remember a long time ago when I worked for a retail company, and a new employee that we had hired, after a week and a half of being in her role, had claimed to have injured herself by falling off a toilet in the staff toilets, resulting in long-term sickness for that employee and a significant employer's liability claim. And it was only through some investigation by the HR team and a legal firm that we're actually able to uncover the fact that this employee had actually done exactly that for the last 2 companies she worked at previously. And had we have done some investigation and some assessment of that employee up front, we could have pulled the chain, if you excuse the pun, on the process with her a lot earlier. So the fact of the matter is, if you really are able to begin to understand employees before you bring them into your business, if you can check their history, if you can check other public information, then you can avoid these types of issues. So I know that these things happen because I've experienced them in the past, and I've seen what they can do. But the one thing I'm not willing to do is for us as an organization or for other people out there to make the same mistakes. And so there are ways in which you can address bringing on board new employees to mitigate these types of risks. And how am I qualified to talk about that? Well, at NetWatch, we are really the global experts at mopping up when things go bad for organizations. And that could be employers' liability claims, it could be issues with data breaches or whatever within an organization. And we work closely with Trevor and other organizations to help support with investigation and analysis of these things. We also offer pre-employment screening and vetting solutions. And because we do so much work on investigating bad employees, we have a really good understanding of what constitutes a bad employee and where those risks can lie. And there's an example I've got here of one of the investigations we did on behalf of one of our clients, Network Rail, where they had an employee who had claimed to have injured his thumb at work, and he'd therefore been signed off on long-term sickness, and he'd created a personal injury claim, and the claim itself was £300,000 for the fact that he was no longer able to use his thumb, he was no longer able to work, and no longer able to sort of look after himself. And we were instructed to investigate this particular individual, and we located social media profiles for this individual, actually in an alias, where we located that he was actually one of the lead guitarists in a Guns N' Roses tribute band. And so we collected all that information and the evidence associated with that. And we also bought some tickets to go and see his show. And our sister company, the Surveillance Group, were kind enough to send some operatives out to go and collect some footage. So the person you see on the left-hand side here is that employee who is claiming that he has an injured thumb that he cannot use. This is the person, sorry, that you will see now in this footage. So bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to play the video. So you can see from that video, not only is he a rather talented guitarist, he can also most definitely use the thumb that he's using to play a guitar behind the back of his head. So as you can imagine, the outcome for Network Rail and also, you know, for that particular individual were very pleasing. And that person actually got 6 months custodial sentence in prison as a result of that particular incident. So these things do occur. And I wanted to take a look now at actually why these things occur. So basically what I did was look at some research to illustrate some of the challenges that you as an employer might be facing when you're receiving CVs from candidates. And what became very, very apparent when looking into this research was the extent and to see just how staggering it is, how willing people are to lie on their CVs. And also the fact that those individuals were able to get away with providing lies on their CVs. And then the survey went on further to explore exactly what people tend to lie about. And these will be basic things like the dates of their previous employment, which people might adjust ever so slightly for certain reasons. Could be that they lost their job. It could be even that they had gaps in their CV and they were actually in Her Majesty's pleasure. But all of these types of things people will lie about on their CV. And unless you are properly assessing the information that you're presented with, you run the risk of not identifying these risks. They'll even lie about things like their work experience and the responsibilities they had at their previous role. And that's absolutely fine if you're in a low risk job. If you're stacking a shelf in Tesco's, ultimately, you're potentially only going to injure yourself if you drop something on you. But if you're an airline pilot or if you're a JCB driver and you're handling, heavy machinery, then if you're lying about the responsibilities and the skills and the experience that you have, you could potentially kill people. So these things are really important, and it depends obviously on the role as to the extent of the importance of establishing this information. But ultimately, if people are lying on their CV, then chances are they're not a particularly great employee for your business. What I then went on to do was to have a look at what professionals and HR professionals in particular have to say about it. And what actually became apparent from that perspective is 85% of HR professionals were saying that actually they do make bad hires. And they also were willing, so 39% of them were also willing to admit that the processes could be improved. So what this really sort of makes everyone, me included, start to think is, why would you continue to do things in the same way you've always traditionally done them if we know that candidates are lying on their CVs, if we know that HR professionals will admit that they make bad hires, and also we know that the processes can be improved? And so at NetWatch, we have been pioneering a number of different ways in which to improve the process of assessing new employees to your business. And what I wanted to just touch on quickly as well, we're here today really to help you identify some of the warning signs, to fix some of those gaps, and to also build the business case internally for why this should be a real priority for your executive team if you are making hires moving forward. And so bad hires, when you look at a bad hire, what that can feel like in your organization, bad hires can be a culture clash, or they can be someone who just causes a disturbance to your work environment. And you'll know that feeling personally when you meet someone for the first time and you instantly dislike them. How does that make you react? How does that make you feel? How does that change the environment around you? Well, in your personal life, you can go somewhere else. You can go home, you could stand somewhere else, you could, leave a restaurant or whatever. But if you're at work, how does that person change that work environment? And I'm sure people, all of you on the session today, will have at some time worked with someone who has changed that work environment, or who you have felt is a disruption, or potentially a bad employee, and that can have a multiplying effect on you and your colleagues. And this will be your productivity. So if someone is causing disturbance, they'll affect your productivity. They might affect your decision to leave. So they might affect things like staff attrition. They might also affect your opinion of your employer. Why on earth have they brought this moron in to come and work with me? And ultimately it can result in people leaving. So it will create stress, and it will create an environment that is unsettling for people. What it can also do, though, is have a further effect outside of that financially. So people often say, well, I've made a bad hiring decision, it doesn't matter, it was only their salary. But actually, when you look at it and you put it on paper, you will have paid a recruitment fee for bringing on board that person. And there's just a rough example here. You will have had a potential output that you're expecting for that particular role and that particular person to provide. So if that person only provides a fraction of that output, that also has an effect. If they're disturbing other people, making lots of noise, causing people upset, then they're going to have an impact on overall productivity. And then there's all the other costs associated with setting them up. So making a bad hiring decision isn't just about the salary, it's actually about the overall cost to your business. So getting it right in the first place is really critical and really important. And to that end, I'm going to introduce now Trevor, from Hemsley, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the challenges and risks that he's seeing during the global pandemic with regards to employees that are bad or that have gone wrong. So Trevor, I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks, Trevor. I think you may be on mute, Trevor, unfortunately. Apologies. Okay.
As Tristan, thank you, Tristan. As Tristan said, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've seen across the course of the last year, and perhaps a look into the future about what we're going to see. So I'm going to talk about what I've called tongue-in-cheek called the 3 R's: recruitment, wrongdoing, and redundancies. Now, obviously, I can't really emphasize enough Tristan's point that the key is to get the right people in the first place. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about in respect of recruitment, lots of you might not be thinking at all about recruitment at the moment. Business is pretty tough in many sectors, but we're already seeing a really substantial increase in respect of poaching exercises. That's companies seeing that they can gain an advantage by poaching the best people from their competitors. And we're acting, frankly, on both sides of the fence at the moment, both companies who are out doing poaching exercises to try and gain a business advantage, and companies who are suffering from poaching exercises. In both respects, there's some tricky stuff that it's worth thinking about. So my plan is to give you some practical tips, really. So if you think about it from a negative perspective, that you may not be thinking of recruiting, you may not be thinking of poaching anyone, but there might be someone out there right now thinking about poaching your best people, or the people, your best salesmen who have the best contacts, or simply trying to pick someone up because they might be able to bring some confidential information of yours that will help their business. And I want to talk about how what you might think about in order to protect yourself on that basis. Now, most of you will probably have heard about restrictive covenants and may even have some of them in your contracts. I think over the years, most of my clients, I think, haven't really paid very much attention to restrictive covenants right up until the point that they need to rely on them. And frankly, that's a very late time to rely on them. And they don't really think about them because many people assume that restrictive covenants can't be enforced. That's simply not true. And the reason we've got to the point where people don't think they can be enforced is because fundamentally the test that the courts apply in considering whether they should enforce restrictive covenants is whether the drafting goes absolutely no further than necessary to achieve its aim. So in simple terms, bad drafting, loose drafting will mean that they won't be upheld. So obviously, if someone suddenly starts poaching your people, there's nothing you can do about the covenants. You're stuck with them. So the first thing you want to do is check whether they're likely to hold, check whether, get advice on whether they're likely to be enforceable in the courts. Because if they're not enforceable in the courts, there might not be very much you can do about it unless there's evidence of them stealing data from you or something like that. I'm sure Tristan would be happy to talk to you about that if you're in that situation. What I did want to say, though, is if a court will agree to enforce them, it can absolutely be financially devastating for the individual on the wrong end of an injunction. So a little story for you. At my old firm, when I was a partner at Rag & Co., I acted for a large insurance brokers company, and one of their key competitors stole someone very senior, poached someone very senior in the organization. That individual, before he left, decided it might be a clever idea to take their client lists with him. So he downloaded the client lists. Shortly after he left, they realized on reviewing his laptop that he'd taken client lists, and we immediately injuncted the individual. The court gave us an order to search his house, and And in fact, over the course of a year, we had 50 rolling injunctions, one on average every week, because he was seeking to continue to hide the data and hide his wrongdoing. The effect of that, of course, it was expensive for our client, though ultimately they did manage to retrieve most of their costs. But the effect on the poaching business was absolutely devastating, because the individual that they had poached from us to lead their business was literally tied up in court for 12 months dealing with rolling injunctions. So a well-effected and executed injunction process, if your restrictive covenants will hold, can be a really effective way of preventing damage to your business. So top tips, only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to give you some top practical tips. The first one is, if you're poaching, check the covenants of the employee that you're looking to poach, and understand whether they're likely to hold or not. Check that risk and reward thing, because if you take a risk and the reward is that actually you spend 12 months fighting injunctions and not running your business, that might not have been a good risk reward scenario. So check them and try and avoid, while talking to the individual during the poaching exercise, try and avoid any evidence of a potential breach going onto the record. If you're facing a poaching event, again, check your covenants and understand whether they're likely to hold, what protection you have against the individual leaving. Gather evidence. Again, Tristan and his team will be able to help you gather that evidence of any breaches which are on the laptop or on your server, on any phones, things like that. And really importantly, and avoid, ignore this one at your peril, you need to really act quickly in these situations. If a court sees that you've spent 2 or 3 months messing around, they're not going to grant an injunction. They're called emergency injunctions for a reason, and that's that they're expected to be pretty immediate. In truth, though, as I said at the start, leaving it until the point that you face a poaching exercise is too late. My strong advice now is, if there are people that you'd be concerned about losing because of their customer connections, because of their knowledge in the business, review their covenants now. Make sure they go absolutely no further than necessary to protect your legitimate business interests, and make sure they're tailored to that individual. So that's recruitment. Wrongdoing, I wanted to pick up on, because frankly, we've seen an enormous increase in wrongdoing this year. A recent study of UK companies showed that 38% had found evidence, discovered evidence of an internal fraud in the last year. So how many percent didn't find that evidence? Chances are, the truth is, that you are probably being defrauded by an employee right now. You simply don't know it. The risks, the risk statistics, again, come right back to Tristan's point. Make sure you get the right people in the first place, because people with integrity are much more likely, or much less likely rather, to defraud the company. Certainly our experience bears out this study that of the rising numbers of fraud in companies in the UK. And frankly, my background, I'm an ex-fraud squad detective before I became a barrister and then an employment solicitor. And I've always undertaken a fair amount of complex investigations as part of my role as an employment lawyer. But this year we've really seen a massive uptick, and the kinds of things that we're seeing is not just internal fraud, but bribery and corruption. We've seen data breaches and individuals selling personal data from company records. So some really substantial ones, and the kinds of fines that you as a company can face in respect of that kinds of behavior can be devastating. 4 to 6% of global turnover. So it can be really, really devastating. The first thing I want to say on this really is that in pretty much every case that I've worked on, certainly this year, let's call it the compliance culture at the company was pretty lax. There was really very little evidence that the board was communicating to their employees that they took a zero tolerance approach to fraud and that kind of wrongdoing. And frankly, if you looked more closely at their strategies, their compliance strategies, they were often doing very little to ensure that couldn't happen, whether that's in respect of software that can be installed in your system to try and prevent and detect those kind of behaviors, or whether it's in respect of their policies, and their policies not just being a piece of paper that was issued 8 years ago, but is actually something that's living and it's communicated regularly and often to individuals, and training provided to individuals. So that's the kind of environment we see really on almost every occasion that we get called in to investigate these types of issues. So again, I'm going to give you some quick practical top tips. The first one is, if you don't yet know that you've suffered a fraud event or a bribery event or a data breach, assume you have, because the statistics suggest you probably have. Secondly, I'd say review your compliance strategy now. Don't wait till a breach, because if the serious fraud office turn up at your door in a dawn raid, one of the first things they're going to want to see is the evidence of your compliance strategy and what it is that you do to ensure that this can't happen in your business. So review it now. Don't wait till there's a breach. Obtain the kind of software that you need, which can protect your systems. Again, I'm sure Tristan at NetWatch and his team can advise you on what that might look like. Make zero tolerance clear. Make sure it comes from the board as well. The Serious Fraud Office talk about the tone at the top. And one of the things they're looking at as a principle is, what is the tone at the top? Is the board saying to people, is it communicating, we have a zero tolerance approach to this? Are the board ensuring that training's taking place, that audits are being done to try and pick up on these kinds of issues? So it's really about prevention rather than cure. Introduce training, obviously, if you don't have any. And top tips, if you do suffer an event, whether that's very often they come to light through whistleblowing, but if you do suffer an event, a fraud event, a bribery event, data breach, first thing you really need to think about is securing the evidence. Don't have your IT manager rooting around in your system. Get in some experts like NetWatch who can help you to secure your evidence in a way which means it can be used as evidence. Secondly, call experts. Frankly, I'm not going to blow my own trumpet on this, but there are certainly experts out there who can help you understand both the effect of these issues, not just from an employee and employment law perspective, but from a criminal perspective. And sometimes the way that those things work hand in hand is really, really important. So the third R, and this is actually not one that we've seen so much this year, if I'm honest, because most companies have taken use of the furlough scheme that was introduced by the Chancellor. But of course, at some point, that furlough scheme is going to come to an end. We don't know when it is at this point. I think it's just been extended again, but it is going to come to an end at some point. And I think the predictions at the moment are that we're likely to hit somewhere in the region of 10% unemployment at the end of the furlough schemes. So I just really, I don't want to teach you to suck eggs. You've all undertaken redundancy processes before. What I want to do, and I guess I should write a book on this at some point, I want to give you a little bit of a Machiavellian approach to employment law. Everything that you ever wanted to know, but your employment lawyer wouldn't tell you. What's important from a tribunal's perspective, if you end up in tribunal after a redundancy process, is ensuring that you carried out a fair process and that any dismissals were undertaken fairly. And that's very obvious. What employment lawyers very often don't tell you is that the most sophisticated companies will really design that process to ensure that the outcome they want to achieve is one which they actually achieve. It would be, frankly, a poor process which resulted in you firing the very people that you thought could best move the business forward. So all I'm saying to you is think very carefully about in the creation of your process. Think very carefully in the criteria that you decide as selection criteria, and of course tick the boxes in terms of process. But it's really all in the planning that's important in respect of your redundancy exercises. Think about what you want to achieve, and of course ensure nothing is on the record that suggests that you prejudged the process. So it's a little look into the future, and I'll look back at the kinds of things we've seen in the past year. But as back to Tristan's initial point, really, the key is actually making sure you get the right people in the first place. So with that, back to you, Tristan.
Thanks very much, Trevor. That was really, really great. Some really useful tips and insight there. So thank you very much for that. So just really moving on from what Trevor has to say there, I was just going to briefly touch on some of the themes and some of the reasons why actually people do hire people. So at NetWatch, we do things a little differently when it comes to screening and vetting new hires. And we believe there's numerous ways that we can help you identify the warning signs of some of those issues Trevor has mentioned, and some of the other issues that I've mentioned as well, prior to getting someone into your business. And the key thing that I like to talk about is when you're onboarding a new employee, most organizations will do some form of employment screening and vetting. And if you don't, then I already know that you're making bad hires and we probably need to have a chat anyway. But if you do, you'll typically look to establish basic information. And this might be verifying someone's identity through a driving license or a passport. It might be verifying their contact information like their address and their telephone number. You might do a credit check depending on the role. You might also look at things like CCJs or whether or not they have a criminal record. But all of these things are kind of tick box exercises, and they'll tell you a certain amount about a person, but they're often a very low bar to set. So, whether or not someone has a criminal record is a relatively low bar to set when assessing whether or not someone is suitable for your organization. But what we look at NetWatch is what we call someone's personal brand. And these are all the intangible elements around and alongside everything else that a person has to offer that helps you to assess whether or not that individual will do well in your organization, whether or not they will fit with the overall organizational culture, whether they will perform with integrity, which Trevor touched on, whether they're an honest individual, what their attitude to work and life is, and also their experience and other elements as well. And how we do this at NetWatch. So if I told you that there's a library, and a lot of you hopefully on the session today will recognize this library because it's Birmingham Library. If I told you in Birmingham Library, for every single employee you ever employ, there is a book. And that book is sat on the shelf, and it's the book that says all about me. And it tells you all of those different intangible elements about a person. And that's public information that you can go in and you can pick up that book and you can read. Well, effectively, someone's online footprint and their online identity is that. So at NetWatch, we are experts in interpreting open source and social media data. And this is all of the information that a person, could be a candidate, has put online about themselves. And that could be listing their previous roles and their experience on LinkedIn, or their location information and pictures of themselves on Facebook. It could be their interests, activities, and hobbies on other social media platforms. And this information can be used in a number of different ways. At NetWatch, we can link mobile phone numbers and email addresses to social media accounts. And this can help you validate the information that a person has provided, i.e., are they the correct person? Is this a picture of that person? And is the general stuff that they're saying true? But we can also look deeper into some of the other elements about that person, such as their interests, the activities they get up to, their connections, the type of content they share, their links and associations. And a lot of organizations get really concerned when it comes to social media data and about interpreting and using this data. And some organizations will actually look at this information themselves. And one of the challenges in doing this is, if your hiring manager is looking at someone's social media profile, they can potentially introduce unfair bias, and they can also have other risks. So if they accidentally clicked and liked something or commented on something, then before you know it, you can end up having to pick up the phone to Trevor to try and help resolve another type of issue. But so for us at NetWatch, we act as independent experts that are used to interpreting and managing this information, and we can provide a detailed risk assessment of a potential candidate, which is based on the role that they're applying for, to tell you whether or not we feel that candidate is a good fit, that the information they've provided to you is correct. And we do all of that as a managed service, and we provide that information back to you to allow you to really understand and assess these intangible elements from a candidate. And so that's very much what we do day in, day out at NetWatch. And so, you know, if that is an element, if you think there's potentially some value in exploring that, then that would, you know, obviously we'd be happy to talk to you. But once you have the right staff, the next question is, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them happy, and how do you keep them switched on? So I'm going to hand now over to Gemma Carter-Morris from Next Steps Consulting to talk specifically about this. So Gemma, over to you.
Tristan, sorry about that. Yeah, so as Tristan said, I'll be talking about the current challenges for leaders and organisations, how we enhance those engagement and wellbeing levels, and from our experience over the last 9 months, what we need to be doing in the short term and the longer term to retain and recruit that talent currently. So I always like to start sessions with this quote, and if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this presentation, it's that as a leader, you need to be looking after your own well-being. It's never been a more important time for leaders to lead, and we'll be facing issues that we've never had to face before, as well as being under an increasing amount of pressure and stress where we need to be able to be at our best. So it's within our control to look after ourselves, which in turn allows us to be a better leader and to look after those in our teams and those that are around us. So I don't think I need to reiterate too much the difficulties that we've all faced over the last 9 months and are continuing to face. But the longer this pandemic continues, the more fatigued we're all becoming, our energy levels are diminishing, and our mental and physical well-being is suffering. And again, touching on some of those challenges, we as leaders have never had to deal with so much at one time, and everything that we're currently facing is impacting on us, on our teams, and on our organisations. And we're in this constant tactical place at the moment. You know, we're shouldering the responsibilities of our organisations, we're responsible for people's livelihoods, and while some of these things are now becoming the norm, we've never experienced furlough before, leading remote teams, and even recruiting and onboarding virtually. So we are under a lot of stress and pressure and challenges as leaders. And then following on from that, it comes as no surprise that this is having a knock-on impact in the workplace. And there's some recent research here from McKinsey & Co, which is highlighting how employees are currently feeling and some of the detrimental outcomes for our organisations. So nearly half of individuals are now looking for new roles, and it's our job as leaders to look at what we can put in place and do within our organisations that retains talent, as well as putting people and our teams at the forefront of all of our decision making and really building that people-centric culture. It's also worth highlighting that 36% of individuals say their mental health has impacted on their sales performance. And there's so much research out there at the moment showing the detrimental impact that the pandemic has had on our mental well-being, with Mind estimating that 60% of adults have said their mental health has deteriorated since the first lockdown. And some of the other statistics on this slide just highlight the negative impact that 2020 has had on employee engagement, as well as motivation levels, productivity, and our ability to be creative and to collaborate with others. So we can't ignore some of these challenges, and there needs to be both a short-term and a long-term plan put in place to mitigate these and really build that culture that cares and an organisation that employees want to be part of. So thinking about what drives employee engagement, again, oh, sorry, yeah. So again, those opportunities for the learning and development, they're really, really important. And in a lot of organizations, that's one of the first things that stops when budgets get tight, and when people don't have time to focus on that. That clear link between your work and the company's strategic objectives. So again, people want to understand how they're contributing to the overall purpose of the organization, and they want to be recognized for that good work that they're doing. And I've highlighted that confidence in the senior leadership as well to make the right decisions. So individuals want to have trust in their senior leaders that they're going to put their people first and make those right decisions. I think it's also important to say that millennials and Gen Z, who are making up the big majority of our organisations now, these things are really, really important to them, and more so than the older generations who perhaps just went for, what the rates of pay were and what benefits are. These younger generations really want to be part of an organisation. They want a clear purpose, and they want to be looked after and cared for as well. So these are the areas that we feel are essential for employee engagement, and these all need to be sort of considered in totality and not in isolation. And every single part of the employee life cycle contributes to engagement levels. And if employees feel that some of these areas are not deemed important to an organisation, then their engagement levels will fall and they'll likely start looking for other jobs. So the whole approach to employee engagement needs to be underpinned by your vision and your values and your purpose. These need to be core to everything that you do, as well as a very clear communications plan so you can articulate all areas of your engagement plan to everyone. And through experience with our clients, when organisations focus on all of these areas and have them interlinked with their strategic objectives, so think of it as kind of joining the dots for all of the things on that slide, as well as their teams having complete clarity on what the expectations are from them, they'll have much higher levels of engagement and satisfaction. So again, I'm sure everyone's aware of why employee engagement is important and why this needs to be part of your people plan and your wider organisational strategy. But by having engaged teams, it will increase your productivity levels, it will increase your talent retention, as well as playing a key role in attracting the top talent within your sector. Positive engagement will also lead to an improved culture, better employee well-being, which in turn will decrease your absence levels. And as I mentioned, employees now more than ever want to work for an organisation that puts their people first. And millennials and Gen Z particularly place that emphasis on how they're supported, and their company and managers supporting them and their personal well-being is in one of the top 3 drivers for applying to an organisation. So this is becoming more and more important as we get more of the younger generations coming into our organisations. So Charles touched on it very briefly at the beginning, but one of the areas that's become increasingly more important for employees and critical for organisations is focusing on employee well-being. And I think this last year has highlighted that even further. And employee engagement and well-being, they go hand in hand. They're both multifaceted and they need a holistic approach across all areas of an organisation. And wellbeing now very much needs to be more than just a couple of tokenistic initiatives. It needs to be embedded in the culture of your organisation to ensure that long-term sustainable approach. So how do we build this culture of wellbeing? Firstly, we need a plan. Any data that you might have within your organisation, from engagement surveys, absence data, really use this to try and build up what your plan's going to be, and have really realistic timescales. We can't achieve everything at once. So think about the things that are going to make the biggest impact initially, start to embed those, and then once they're embedded, we can build on that further. It has to be leadership led. In a lot of organisations, it's just a couple of people trying to drive wellbeing, and that won't embed that within the culture. So leaders need to, take hold of that strategy, lead by example, and really champion it at every level. And it needs to be everyone's responsibility. So, lots of people think, oh, well-being is just the responsibility of HR. It's not. The leaders need to be driving through that strategy. Managers need to be given the support, the training and development to be able to look after the well-being of their employees. And employees themselves need to feel part of the process. They need to be asked for their feedback. And they also need to be given the time to look after their well-being. So there's no point having loads of great initiatives and programs, but then employees not feeling like they can take an hour off to go and take part in a workshop or a session that's being run because they're under too much pressure. I think following the challenges of 2020, it's really important that you continually review the current offer and the programs that you've got, and what you did have this time last year may no longer be fit for purpose. So continue to review the offer that you've got and what people might need in the future. Supporting mental health is no longer a nice to have, it's absolutely critical within your organisation, particularly after the last year. And again, the approach to wellbeing needs to be really holistic. You need to look at how you can train and develop managers so they're confident in having conversations around mental well-being. Think about how you positively promote a really good work-life balance. So if you as a leader are sending emails at 9-10 o'clock at night, that's not promoting a good work-life balance for people. Breaking down stigmas as much as possible. So there was some research done at the start of last year by Deloitte, and the percentages of people that have either been dismissed or demoted when they've highlighted that they've got a mental health issue are quite shocking. So breaking down those stigmas and keeping talking about it. So, as leaders, talking about your experiences, encourage people to talk about what they're doing to support their mental health. And have that real human and compassionate approach to managing as well. Thinking about flexible working as well. So, I think the last year has shown us that we can work flexibly, but think about how you can take that further than just working from home. It's how you can have job shares, part-time jobs, think about term time only roles so you can support working parents, and think about where and how people can carry out their jobs. And by having a true kind of flexible working policy, you'll also attract a more diverse talent base to your organisation. And finally, think about how you can personalise your programmes and tailor them to the different demographics within your organisation. So each group within your companies will have very different needs, and you'll see a far greater return if you can be a little bit more personalised in your approach. So thinking back to the slide earlier on the challenges that organisations are currently facing, it's likely that we'll continue to experience really high levels of change, certainly for the first half of this year. And this is going to continually impact our teams, their well-being and productivity and motivation levels. So it's important that we accept this and develop those ways of working, which allows us to be really agile and keep on top of the changes that we keep getting thrown at us. And again, thinking back to that leadership piece, it's important that our teams have confidence and trust in us as leaders to make those right decisions, and that we're in control of the situation. So things that we think you should think about for the next couple of months, embrace that ambiguity. We know that it can be quite unsettling dealing with this constant change, but change is constant in our lives. And so thinking about how we learn to manage change ourselves. And linked to that is kind of safeguarding your own well-being. I talked about it at the start. It really is time for us to, take that time on a regular basis to safeguard our own well-being so we can be at our best. Staying true to our organisational values, so living and breathing these at all times, and making sure that we're always treating people, no matter how difficult the situation, with respect. This unity as a leadership team, again, we'll all have our challenges and differences with people in our teams, but if we can really show support for one another and let this be really visible that you're really connected and coming forward as a collective leadership team, that will be really beneficial for your teams to see. In terms of communications, I don't think you can communicate enough at the moment. You need to be honest and transparent, but reassure people. And again, there's been some research to show when people aren't communicated with, it really increases their anxiety levels of what's happening within the organisation. Are their jobs going to be safe? Are they at risk of redundancy? And definitely don't overpromise, but make sure you do keep up those continual communications channels. And be really clear on what you expect from people. So people's roles have been changing quite a lot over the last 9 months. And if people aren't clear on what's expected of them, then their engagement levels are going to drop, their productivity is going to drop. So make sure you're really clear on those requirements and objectives. Don't forget to celebrate success. There's still been some amazing, good and great things that have come out of organisations. So make sure you reward your teams, and that doesn't always have to be, you know, financially, just appreciating people and recognise when they've done a good job. Continually listen to your people and seek that feedback, and, you know, understand how people are feeling. And if you do get feedback, make sure you act on it and go back to people with what actions you've taken. And, you know, I don't think any of us can forget to keep an eye on the finances. That's really important, and fundamentally that's what's going to keep our businesses going. So in terms of the short-term areas, you know, we can't lose sight of the bigger picture. I think we've all been guilty of focusing on that tactical planning and the here and now without taking that time as a leadership team to really focus on the longer term and understand what needs to be done to evolve or diversify our business so we can be in a much stronger position in the future. So some longer term areas of focus to think about are, you know, continually to embed that vision, purpose and values, and remind employees of how they're contributing to those. Continually invest in learning and development. You know, I've touched on this, but with it being one of the top drivers of employee engagement, you know, as well as being critical for your succession planning and your talent retention, make sure you continue to have a focus on this. Develop your strategy for wellbeing. You know, again, as I touched on, this is going to be more and more important over the next year and beyond. Think about reviewing the skills as well in your wider team. So business who are demonstrating, you know, growth and survival at the moment are looking at different ways in which they can utilize their people. They're redeploying them in different areas. They're upskilling them and new things that they might be starting to do. And just don't be afraid of trying new things. And I think take a regular pulse of the organisation. So, you know, how your teams are feeling this time last year or this time 6 months ago might not be how they're feeling now, and don't assume you know how people are feeling. So, you know, a regular quarterly pulse survey can be really important just to understand how people are feeling. So I guess to summarise, your people will always be your greatest asset, and by having that people-centric approach and keeping this at the forefront of all your decision-making and strategy development will enable you to retain the talent, recruit talent, as well as having a motivated, engaged and productive workforce to better allow us all to weather this storm and any future storms that we might face. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tristan.
Thank you very much, Gemma. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think what really struck me with all of that actually is there's so many themes that go throughout your presentation and through Trevor's presentation, and it's quite evident that if you're looking after your people, if you're supporting them, if you're giving them the encouragement, then you're only going to reduce the risk of someone doing something that you don't want them to do. But also, obviously, if you put in the work up front to make sure you're employing the right people, then you can really avoid some of those risks, but also, you know, the risk of people leaving your business in other areas as well. So I think it's, you know, for me, that's a great learning point, and I really valued the input from Trevor and the input from you, Gemma, as well, because I felt that actually there's a lot of synergy between everything that we've all been saying. So I'm going to hand over to Charles, just aware of the time really. But yeah, thank you everyone, obviously, for listening into our session today. Charles, I think you've got a couple of questions that you want to go through as well. So thank you.
To all the panelists today, I thought that was a really insightful, comprehensive overview. Some really good takeaways, and also it all kind of, as you said, Tristan, all kind of strings together quite nicely. You know, it's amazing how you kind of complemented each other in many ways, in the sense of the different processes and angles to look at. So no, very good. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Just a point before I turn to those, the details are on the current slide, the contact details of all of our panelists today. So if you do have any further questions or queries, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to any member of the panel today. So just turning to the first question, and actually it does quite nicely follow on from what we were just saying in terms of the balance of the webinar. So Tina has mentioned that embedding a culture of mental health and well-being, whilst also being clear on wrongdoing and compliance, is a huge balance. Any tips on getting that kind of balance? Any thoughts there from any of our panelists? Trevor?
Yeah, so for me, it's actually it's like any good relationship. It comes down to communication. good communication is the key, and I think it's perfectly possible to be both supportive and to draw red lines, as long as you have that culture of communication. Say, look, we want to help you, we want to put training in place, we want to support you, but this is a red line for us, and I think that's can be a very clear message, and doesn't. It can be a difficult balance, because if you get the balance wrong, you're too robust, then it won't go down well with your employees. But providing you can get that balance right, it seems to me communication is the key.
So almost having that kind of pragmatic approach, communicating from both sides, and being open. I think openness and integrity has kind of come throughout this pandemic. We've seen the value of those, certainly, and that certainly holds true here. Thank you, Trevor. Any other thoughts, Tristan or Gemma?
Yeah, I think I'd just say, it comes back to that setting of the expectations and being really clear with people of what kind of you're expecting from them, and also kind of that living by your values. So, your values are how you treat people and what people can expect from you. So again, that communication of your values, your vision, your purpose, and those expectations should hopefully go a little bit of the way to alleviate that.
And Tristan, finally to you on that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's around being able to communicate those things effectively shows an element of professionalism. And if that's the outset, the point of recruitment, that these things, this is the culture and the values that our organisation holds to, these are the reasons why these things are really important, then it becomes set in stone, and it becomes a behaviour rather than something being told off about. And I think that's really important. And then also just linking it back to what that means for customers is always really important. It's one of the things that we always try and do at NetWatch, is to sort of say, well, the reason this is so important, that you need to look after this data or look after this information, is because ultimately it will affect our customers as well. And so actually having an appreciation that you're not there just to do a job, you're there as part of an organisation to support customers or other organisations is really important, because that builds that engagement, I think.
Great. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thanks all for your responses. One final question in the chat is from Mike Butler. Hiring your first overseas employee, how easy is it to background check the overseas employee and understand the employment framework? So yeah, really interesting question there, particularly in today's age. So Tristan, go to you first.
Yeah, I'll shoot first. I mean, the honest truth on that is extremely easy. And we get background checks throughout the world. We've taken employment references in South America to investigations into employees throughout the world. So very, very simple. There are some standard data sets. Obviously, with things like open source and social media data, a lot of that information is public. It's available from anywhere. So extremely easy, and something that we do very regularly for organizations. And it's really critical, particularly, if you've never physically met the person, they could tell you anything that they possibly wanted to make up. So you have to be absolutely certain that they're the right person. I'm not sure if Trevor might have something to add to that end as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So obviously there's lots of information that can be found online nowadays about the employment framework. What I'd say is, don't rely entirely on that information, because I guess the thing is, coming from a kind of a British employment law culture, we have a certain expectation as to what employment law might look like in another country. And it can be really, really very different. Things can come up and bite you. Things that you would take for granted here and really not even think about can take a completely contrary position in another country. So I'd say take local advice to ensure that you are ticking local boxes. And frankly, over the last 25 years, I've built up a framework of employment lawyers I've worked with throughout the world. And if you just give me a call, I won't charge you. I'll give you numbers for people that I'd rely on and trust.
Fantastic. That's great. So that kind of takes us over the hour. I'm conscious of time and don't want to keep anyone any longer. So Thank you to all of our panelists today. Really useful, detailed insights there. Hopefully plenty of takeaways for everyone that's attended today. Hopefully you found today useful. Again, contact, as I mentioned, details are on the screen at the moment, and we will also circulate a post-event email with the contact details of all of our panelists from today. So all that's left for me to say is, again, huge thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks to you guys for all joining today. Hopefully you found today's session useful. Please do keep in touch with us at the Chamber if there's anything that we can help with, in addition to all the webinars and resources that are available online. We hope to see you online events soon, and stay safe, most importantly. So see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.